Extra Points Fantasy Football Show, the place where you receive expert fantasy advice for champions. With your host, NFL fantasy football expert, analyst, and draft scout, Lance Goodman. Hello, NFL football fans, fantasy football owners. Welcome back to the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show, the place where you get expert fantasy advice for champions. As always, I'm your host, NFL fantasy football expert, analyst, and draft scout, Lance Goodman. I've got a great and exciting show on tap for you today. We're going to be taking a look at our fourth updated rankings for the NFL fantasy football season. We're going to bring up our big boards and break them down. Let's go ahead and start at the quarterback position and see how things are shaping up heading into week 12. Trending right now as my latest top 10 options. You take a look at our board here. Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills continues to show when he's on top of his game and at a peak performance level. 6 overall touchdowns this last week at home against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This guy continues to be an absolute stud when he is playing on top of his game. Matthew Stafford of the Los Angeles Rams played against one of the toughest defenses in the NFL this past weekend. Still was able to come out of there with a couple TD passes and no interceptions. Drake May continues to be surgical in his work for the New England Patriots. Brock Purdy wasted no time returning from that turf toe injury, had up over 200 passing yards and 3 TDs for the 49ers. Dak Prescott had a huge game on Monday night against the Las Vegas Raiders. Jared Goff is cold on the road, but at home, he is still money in the bank. And on the road, I should say, against tough defenses, he has his struggle. But we did see him back in week 10 dice up the Washington Commanders defense on the road as well. Jacoby Brissett for the Arizona Cardinals continues to be one of the top and hottest waiver wire pickups, continues to do his thing and stack the big numbers for the Arizona Cardinals. Daniel Jones was on bye this week, but we've seen him play extremely well this year. Needs to cut down on the turnovers, but certainly has the stable of players around him to help him succeed. Justin Herbert had probably the worst game of his career this past week, but we know he has an array of weapons around him for the Los Angeles Chargers. And then Caleb Williams, a tough game this past weekend on the road against a fierce division rival in the Minnesota Vikings. But we know his dual threat ability and the fact that the Chicago Bears end up in a lot of shootouts will continue to help his numbers trend up. Let's go ahead and take a look at our next board. We're talking about Jackson Dart of the New York Giants. Missed this past weekend in concussion protocol, but we know when he returns to the lineup, he's been a proven commodity, especially with his ability to pick up rushing yards and rushing TDs. Patrick Mahomes, Bo Nix, both of those guys played each other in a fierce division game this past weekend, but we know that both of those guys, when they're on top of their game, have certainly shown the ability to put up some big numbers. Sam Darnold, bad Sam, showed up this week against the Los Angeles Rams, but I truly believe in a matchup like this week at Tennessee, he'll bounce back when the matchup is right. He's still a guy that you can trust and has played at a high level all year. Lamar Jackson, another guy, when the matchups are there, he certainly has an ability to perform at a high level. We've seen that a couple weeks ago against an inferior defense like the Miami Dolphins. Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles is struggling right now through the air. Less than 200 passing yards, but we know his ability, like we've seen this past week, to pick up rushing touchdowns with the tush push is always going to keep him fantasy relevant. Joe Flacco had an off day this past weekend, but that was a revenge game on the road against a Steelers defense that was wanting to make amends for the last time they played Cincinnati when Joe Flacco was up over 400 passing yards. He'll miss his top receiver in Jamar Chase this weekend at home against New England, but he should finish the season strong once he has Chase back in the lineup along with fellow big-time receiver T. Higgins. Baker Mayfield still figuring things out. Those weapons are at a minimum right now with the likes of Chris Godwin, Jaden McMillan, and Mike Evans being out of that lineup, but nonetheless, still finds a way to get it done. Had a rushing touchdown does still have Emeka Ibuka at number one receiver for the Buccaneers at his disposal, along with some young guys that I'm pretty sure when the matchups are there, he'll mix and match in. You look at Jordan Love and C.J. Stroud, both of those guys a bit hot and cold, but again, when the matchups are there, you're certainly going to give Jordan Love probably a little bit more of an edge. C.J. Stroud looking to return from a concussion this upcoming week as well. He missed his second straight game this past weekend at Tennessee. As we swing over to our last board, these guys are going to be mixed and matched in spot-based plays, guys who are going to be in your deeper leagues, your two quarterback leagues, guys that you may have to plug in on a bye week, but still are going to be in that boom or bust mode. Let's start at the top with Bryce Young, and I think he is a perfect example for the Carolina Panthers. You took a look at what he did in Week 10 at home against the New Orleans Saints. Very poor showing, but then you turn around this week on the road in Atlanta, and the guy looks like the next coming of Joe Montana. 448 passing yards, a career record for him, 3 TDs, absolutely blew it up and put on a big performance. I'm not sure if a lot of fantasy football owners were able to take advantage of that matchup, but again, he's a guy like most of these quarterbacks on this list who are going to be either extremely hot or extremely cold. Hard to find middle ground for most of these guys. I think that certainly would hold true. You look at J.J. McCarthy of the Minnesota Vikings, struggling with accuracy, struggling with confidence. You hear the murmurs of discontent starting to grow in Minnesota, especially from star wide receiver Justin Jefferson. But I'd probably say if you look at the rest of the quarterbacks on this list, at least from a talent standpoint, he's got the most around him with Jefferson, with Jordan Addison, with T.J. Hockenson, with Aaron Jones. Speaking of Aarons, we've got Aaron Rodgers of the Pittsburgh Steelers. May miss some time, suffered a wrist injury that caused him to come out this past Sunday's game against the Cincinnati Bengals, so keep a close eye on that. Marcus Mariota likely going to be starting the rest of the year for the Commanders with their season being over. I don't think there's a need to bring back the starter in Jaden Daniels, Trevor Lawrence, Tua Tagovailoa, Geno Smith. All of those guys certainly fit the mold of being hot or cold. We've got some rookies in there. When you look at Tyler Shaw of the New Orleans Saints, Dillon Gabriel of the Cleveland Browns, Cam Ward of the Tennessee Titans. Very hard to trust any of those guys. We'll see if Shaw can potentially build off the big game he had in Week 10 against the Carolina Panthers. Speaking of Dillon Gabriel, the Cleveland Browns left out of that game this past week with a concussion. We'll see if he'll be ready to go in Week 12. We've got a couple backups rounding out our rankings today. It's going to be Tyrod Taylor taking over for Justin Fields of the New York Jets. And unfortunately for the Atlanta Falcons, Michael Penix Jr. had a knee injury that ended his season, which is going to have veteran Kirk Cousins stepping back in for the Atlanta Falcons. All right, we're going to run to a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll move over to the running back position. It's the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show. NFL football fans, fantasy football owners, welcome back to the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show, the place where you get expert fantasy advice for champions. Let's go ahead now and shift our attention over to the running back position. And when we take a look at our big board and our top 10 trending prospects, we've got Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts continuing to be on a historic mark. Jonathan Taylor absolutely killing it this year in fantasy football and well on his way to leading a ton of owners to a fantasy football championship. And right now, I think when you look at these top 4 running backs, if you by any chance have the combination of a Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Jahmyr Gibbs, or Devon Achane, you are in perfect position to be at least making a deep playoff run, especially if you have some of the right surrounding pieces at the quarterback and wide receiver position, or perhaps maybe even a couple other of these running backs that you have here on the list that you picked up off the waiver wire late in drafts that you are able to plug into your flex position. When we talk about TreVeyon Henderson of the New England Patriots, has really come on strong with the injury to Ramondre Stevenson, has gotten a full workload to himself. The last 2 weeks, 5 touchdowns alone. James Cook of the Buffalo Bills continues to be a main player in their offense. Kyren Williams certainly has a nose for the end zone for the Los Angeles Rams. Javonte Williams continues to get the full workload for that explosive and high-powered Dallas Cowboys offense. How about Rico Dowdell, one of our top waiver wire pickups the second half of the season, in full control of that Carolina backfield? And then Bijan Robinson had a big game in Week 11 against the Carolina Panthers, although in a losing effort. If there are any running backs on this list that I'm concerned about, it will be Bijan Robinson of the Falcons starting quarterback. Michael Penix Jr. gone for the season with the knee injury. Atlanta's top receiver and Drake London going to miss at least a week. So you know that defenses are going to make it their business to clamp down and highly focus on Bijan Robinson and stopping him. Let's go ahead and move now over to our next board of prospects. A lot of big names here. A lot of guys still making it happen. Derrick Henry of the Baltimore Ravens. It definitely is going to be a workhorse as the weather starts to move into winter for that Baltimore Ravens offense. Let's keep our eyes open out for Josh Jacobs, suffering a knee injury, not supposed to be serious. We'll find out later in the week exactly what his status is, but when we know he's healthy, one of the best in the business for the Green Bay Packers. By far, this year's big disappointment has been Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles, averaging less than 70 rushing yards per game, not overly involved in the passing game, only 6 total touchdowns, numbers tremendously down from a year ago, and you just hate to see him get vultured by quarterback Jalen Hurts. He rarely gets goal line carries, and that is something that you just don't see around the NFL by and large when it comes to their team's top running backs, especially a huge talent like Saquon Barkley. I think it would do Philadelphia wonders if they got him in the end zone more often. Travis Etienne, DeAndre Swift, both of those guys in firm control of their backfields. If there's a little concern about DeAndre Swift, it'll be potentially getting vultured for goal line touchdowns by rookie Kyle Monangai. You look at Chase Brown, numbers have been much better over the last month with Joe Flacco taking over at quarterback. Ashton Genty, R.J. Harvey, Omarion Hampton, all three of those rookies in good shape. Omarion Hampton expected to be back after the Week 12 bye for Los Angeles. Let's hope he's fully healthy and ready to go. Certainly started to peak before he got injured with that ankle injury. We know the talent that he is. R.J. Harvey, that was a very difficult division matchup against a stout Kansas City Chiefs defense. We expect for him to get the full workload now with J.K. Dobbins out for the remainder of the season. And then we're also hoping and praying that Bucky Irvin for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers gets back in the lineup soon. I think I speak for a lot of owners out there. He has been missed dearly in your fantasy football lineup. Sean Tucker, the backup for Tampa Bay, has the control of that backfield now. If you were able to pick him up off the waiver wire and play him in Irving's absence, that was a huge bonus for you. Let's go ahead now and shift over to our last board. We're taking a look at Breece Hall of the New York Jets, Devin Singletary of the New York Giants, Woody Marks of the Houston Texans, Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs, Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints, Quinshon Judkins of the Cleveland Browns. Those guys are getting the lion's share of the workload in those respective backfields, but there are other running back committees here on the page that have more talented players in a better position to succeed, but it's kind of hard to tell week to week which one of these guys is going to get the full workload. I think starting in Pittsburgh, Jaylen Warren, Kenneth Gainwell. You're starting to see a 50-50 split between those guys, and it makes it hard to trust Warren, but Gainwell has earned playing time and ended up with 2 touchdowns this past week against the Cincinnati Bengals. When you look at Seattle, we've been talking all year long about Kenneth Walker III, about Zach Charbonnet. Well, this past weekend, it was Walker III who got the bulk of the work. By far, looks like the more explosive and better running back was finally able to find the end zone. Hopefully that's a positive sign to continue to trend upward for fantasy football owners. You look out in Minnesota, Aaron Jones Sr. has now come back from that injury, has earned more playing time, still splitting that workload with Jordan Mason, about a 50-50 split. You look out in Arizona, you have Amari DeMarcado and Bam Knight splitting the work there. And then in Tennessee and Washington, it's turned into an absolute mess when you're talking about Tony Pollard and Tajay Sharp. Just not a lot of production there for Tennessee. The same is holding true out in Washington with the likes of Ja'Cory, Krosky, Merritt, and Chris Rodriguez. Just an ineffective backfield, to say the least. When you do look at Devin Singletary of the New York Giants, Tyrone Tracy Jr. still getting some work behind him. Woody Marks has firm control now of that Houston backfield. He's another rookie with Nick Chubb slacking. It doesn't look like Joe Mixon is going to be returning this year. And then Alvin Kamara, Quinshon Judkins, very difficult to find daylight. You may give Kamara a little bit of edge in terms of PPR. In the right matchups, Judkins still can do damage on the ground. And then for Breece Hall in the New York Jets, just a bad team. All is lost there. They're turning to a backup quarterback this week in Tyrod Taylor. I just don't know about the morale and confidence in that New York Jets team as a whole. We're going to run to another quick break. When we come back, it'll be more of the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show, so don't go in. All right, NFL football fans, fantasy football owners, welcome back to the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show. Let's go ahead now and shift our attention over to the wide receiver rankings and see what pass catchers are pumping in the big numbers for your team so far. Taking a look at our big board here, our top 10 prospects trending heading into week 12. We got CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys, found himself in the end zone yet again, continues to be one of the main apple of quarterback Dak Prescott's eyes. The other guy on this list, George Pickens, continues to be hot. Him and CeeDee Lamb, best wide receiver tandem in the NFL right now. Both of those guys you need in your lineup on a weekly basis. You take a look at Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jamar Chase, Rashee Rice. All of those guys continue to be dominant number one receivers for their respective squads. Jackson Smith-Njigba has 700-yard receiving games. You look at Jamar Chase, unfortunately going to miss week 12 because of an incident on the field where he spit on defensive back from the Pittsburgh Steelers, Jalen Ramsey, but I'm pretty sure that'll get him motivated and have him finish out the season completely strong. Emeka Ibuka, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Stephon Diggs of the New England Patriots, also the preferred options for quarterbacks Baker Mayfield and Drake May. When you took a look at Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons, going to miss at least a week with a knee sprain. Also bad for him, starting quarterback Michael Penix Jr. out for the season with the knee injury. So that is a bleak ending how the Atlanta Falcons are going out this year. We hope that London gets back sooner rather than later. One of the very few bright spots on that Atlanta Falcons team, especially their offense. Let's go ahead now, move over to our next board. We got a lot of guys on here who are making it happen. Look at Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions, T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals, Tatoria McMillan of the Carolina Panthers, Devonta Adams of the Los Angeles Rams, Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals. Jameson Williams has really picked up his production now that head coach Dan Campbell is calling the plays, back-to-back 100-yard receiving games with a touchdown. We know that T. Higgins, one of the top receivers in the NFL, I think right up there with George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb, coupled up with Jamar Chase in Cincinnati as the top wide receiver duos in the NFL. You look at rookie Ted McMillan for the Carolina Panthers, having a great rookie season, exactly what that Carolina passing game needed. Devonta Adams continues to be one of the elite wide receiver twos. I think you can probably put him and Puka Nacua right up there with Higgins and Chase, along with Lamb and Pickens for the top wide receiver duos in the NFL. We're wishing Marvin Harrison Jr. a speedy recovery back for the Arizona Cardinals. Had to miss last week's game with an injury. Troy Franklin, new to our list, but has become the preferred option and main guy for quarterback Bo Nix for the Denver Broncos. We know that Nico Collins, Michael Pittman Jr., Chris Olave, Ladd McConkey, all of those guys very trustworthy as the dominant number one receivers for their teams. If there are any guys, I wouldn't use the word worry, but we know that Michael Pittman Jr. probably has the most target share between those last four wide receivers I spoke about with Collins, Olave, and McConkey, because tight end Tyler Warren, wide receiver Alec Pierce, those guys merit targets. Quarterback Daniel Jones spreads the football around a lot. I think to a certain degree the same can hold true in Los Angeles for Ladd McConkey. We still know that Keenan Allen, Quentin Johnston, and a young rookie tight end Oronde Gadsden II also merit targets. But these top 20 guys that I just went through, extreme confidence, and these are the guys who are going to be making it happen coming down the stretch run. Let's now move over to board 3. Still a lot of name power here, but the production is more up and down. When you talk about Devonta Smith, A.J. Brown, you'd assume, based on talent, that those guys will be right up there as the top wide receiver duos. And I think if given the right opportunity, that could be the case. But right now, a bit too inconsistent. And Devonta Smith has really been the better play, although we did see wide receiver A.J. Brown get a season high in targets this past week after talking to ownership. So maybe things will change for the better for him. But quarterback Jalen Hurts not even averaging 200 passing yards a game. Those guys have become hard to trust. You look at Jawan Jennings, Jalen Waddle, Khalil Shakir, Zay Flowers, Justin Jefferson, Rome Odunze. All of those guys are the preferred and number one option for their respective teams. I think if you're going to look at the guy who has potentially the most upside, it could be Jawan Jennings. Now that quarterback Brock Purdy is back there, we also know that Jalen Waddle is the last man standing out in Miami for quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. And we do know at the wide receiver position, Zay Flowers is definitely the main guy for quarterback Lamar Jackson. I think when you look at Rome Odunze, you look at Justin Jefferson, numbers can fluctuate a little bit. Poor quarterback play there for Justin Jefferson in Minnesota. And when it comes to Rome Odunze, the Chicago Bears are another team where quarterback Caleb Williams spreads the football around a lot. The number 2 receivers for both of those teams, when you talk about DJ Moore and Jordan Addison, by far your preferred option is Jordan Addison. I'm not even sure if DJ Moore is playable in your lineups anymore. And then when we come over to our last board, rounding out our top 40 plus one, you take a look at DK Metcalf, Brian Thomas Jr., Cortland Sutton, Quentin Johnston, Deebo Samuel, Mac Hollins, Trey Tucker. Those guys are still getting a lot of targets, but those numbers are fluctuating up and down. I think you look at DK Metcalf, defenses definitely look to take him away, really with no other threats out there in Pittsburgh. There likely will be a quarterback change with Aaron Rodgers missing a little bit of time with that injuries, a wrist injury. So we'll see how that shakes out. When you look at Alec Pierce, has definitely established himself as that number 2 receiver in Indianapolis next to Michael Pittman Jr. We're awaiting for Brian Thomas Jr. to get back from an injury, but it's just been a bad down year, really, for that Jacksonville passing game overall. Cortland Sutton is a guy who's trending down. Troy Franklin has obviously taken over that number one wide receiver role out for Denver. The same holds true for Quentin Johnston, still getting targets, but Ladd McConkey and tight end Oronde Gaston Jr. seem to be eating up more of the target share. When you look out in Green Bay, numbers aren't overly stellar, but Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson have established themselves as the guy that quarterback Jordan Love is targeting the most. Deebo Samuel, the last man standing in Washington, although the quarterback play is a huge drop-off from starting Jaden Daniels, who's going to be out the remainder of the season, down to Marcus Mariota. Tez Johnson is on and off again, but still a target guy that you can look out in Tampa Bay. Surprisingly, Mac Hollins has become a nice play while starter Keyshawn Butte is out for New England. And then Trey Tucker, after the trade of Jacoby Myers over to the Jacksonville Jaguars, is the guy who is going to be getting the most targets there. All right, that is going to wrap up our show for today. Please make sure to check out our social media pages, to check out our tight end rankings, and also to stay up with me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I drop tons of great content and information all over the internet. It's going to wrap up today's show. You know what it is, the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show, the place where you get expert fantasy advice for champions. I'll see you guys next week. Let's go.